you. Thank you. Yeah. Now, in the introduction, it was mentioned that I coached Little League, softball, soccer, baseball, and all that. That's the only thing I won't reveal, my win-loss record. All right? You can ask me any other question, but I'm not revealing my win-loss record. I get to go to a lot of barbecues. I was in a barbecue at Paducah about a month ago. The guy in front of me had 2 plates of barbecue, and I said, "You're not going to live very long eating like that." And he looked at me kind of cross, and he said, "Well, my granddad lived to be 105. And I said, "Well, I bet your granddad didn't live to be 105 eating like that." And he said, "No, he lived to be 105 by minding his own business." There is a moral to the story. I kind of would like a government that were minding its own business more. I'd like a government that wasn't collecting all our phone records, wasn't collecting all of our credit card records, and really wasn't taxing me and regulating me and, probing me at every moment of my life. I really want to be left alone. And when I think about Vermont and I think about the states we haven't won in a while, I think about states that if we were to embrace the right to privacy, which is the Fourth Amendment, embrace it like we do the Second Amendment. We're good on the Second Amendment. All 55 people running for president are probably good on the Second Amendment, but not so many are good on the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment says you have a right not to have your privacy invaded unless they name who you are, unless they have suspicion that you've done something wrong, unless they call a judge. People say, "Oh, well, that's not important. The Second Amendment's important." If you like the Second Amendment, you're not going to keep it unless you have the Fourth Amendment. If the government can come in your house with a warrant that police write and without a name on the warrant, that's called a general warrant. That's what John Adams said was the spark that led to the revolution. We all are exercised over the Second Amendment, and that's good. I tell people, if you doubt whether I defend the Second Amendment, come into my house unannounced. But the thing is that you got to protect the Fourth Amendment. This is about protecting your records. Remember what happened in Westchester County outside of New York a couple years ago? The newspaper decided to print who had a gun and who didn't have a gun from gun registration records. Well, that's not helpful if you have a gun, but it's also not helpful if you don't have a gun. It's not helpful to know where the prosecutor lives and whether he or she has a gun, or where the judge lives, or where the policeman lives and whether they have a gun or not. But it's also not helpful if you're a woman who's been beaten by an ex-husband or beaten by a boyfriend for them to know you do or don't have a gun and where you live. Your records are important. At the time of our revolution, most of our records were on paper. In fact, the reason, like government always does when they abuse their rights, they wanted to collect tax money. They had passed something called the stamp tax. All of your records were supposed to be stamped, but there was a tax involved. So what they said is, we can't trust these Americans, and so they let the soldiers write the warrants, and they went indiscriminately into any house. They called it a writ of assistance. We also know this as a general warrant. And James Otis fought against this, and this was going on in the 1760s for about 12 years or so before we finally ended up breaking with Britain. But it was about the right to protect your castle. Your castle was your home. You weren't supposed to let the government come in, except for under extraordinary circumstances. But now, it isn't your castle anymore where your records are. Nobody wants to come in your house anymore. They just want to get on your cell phone. Your records are not in your castle any longer. They're in a cloud somewhere. But you can't let the government willy-nilly look at your records. And some will say, in fact, a governor down in New Jersey will say, "But we've got to get terrorists." Well, here's the problem. They aren't catching any terrorists, first of all. It's practically not working. But the court has declared it unlegal. People that are strict constructionists, people who believe in the original intent of the Constitution, don't think it's constitutional. At first, President Obama said, "We caught 52 terrorists." But then they looked at them one by one by one. They found out nobody was caught by this program. And then people say, "Well, we keep getting attacked. We must do something." Well, why don't we use the Fourth Amendment? This is what I told the governor. Call a judge. Tonight in Burlington, if you have a potential murderer or a rapist, and their neighbor says, "I saw him 4 hours go in their house," the police get to the curb, and you know what the police do? They obey the Fourth Amendment, even with the most heinous of criminals. They stand on the sidewalk, and they call a judge at 3 in the morning. What does the judge say? Almost always yes. So I'm the biggest advocate of privacy, but if I'm the judge and you call me and say, the Russians tipped us off to this Boston bomber guy, he flew to Chechnya, and we want a warrant to look at his computer and go in his house. You know what I'm going to say? Yes. But I want the checks and balances. Why do you have checks and balances? Because there have been times when we have had bias enter into this. We incarcerated 100,000 of the Japanese during World War II because of the way they looked. Not because they had done anything wrong, but because of their race and how they looked. In the 60s, we did the same thing to African Americans. We did the same thing to people who protested government policy. So I, for one, say, you know what? I want my day in court. That the government has actually put out some characteristics of who they think might be terrorists and who you're supposed to report if your neighbor is one of these people. Missing fingers was one of the characteristics. Anybody ever met a farmer who was missing a finger? Most of them were probably not terrorists. Likes to pay in cash was another characteristic. I know a few of those people. Has multiple guns in the household. I know a few of those are out there. Has changed the color of their hair is my favorite one. Has stains on the clothing. It's like, really, if these are the characteristics of terrorists, wouldn't you want to be innocent until proven guilty and get your day in court? I'm all for collecting the records of terrorists. I just don't want to collect all of your records. In fact, there are some that are making the argument that we get overwhelmed with records. There's an author by the name of Gladwell, and he writes that good decision making is not about knowledge, it's about understanding. So you can gain all the knowledge, all the information in the world, but if you can't sift through it or understand it, can you do anything with it? I think there's an argument to be made that we have so much information we're overwhelmed with it. The Boston bomber, we were tipped off by the Russians, but we had no clue he had flown back to Chechnya until after he did the bombing. I think we could know more about those for whom we have suspicion. I'm all for finding out more about the people we have suspicion for. The guy that came to Garland in Dallas recently and did a shooting, unfortunately was killed before he was able to get inside. We'd already arrested him once. The guy that's in charge of ISIS, for goodness sakes, was in a prison for several years and we let him go. We have to do a better job with the people who we actually know are threatening to attack us or have attacked us. But I think if we were to defend the Bill of Rights, the entire Bill of Rights, we might do better in states where we aren't doing well enough to win. Some of the young people you see here are here because they want to be left alone. They don't think it's any of the government's damn business. What they do or say on their phone. They think their phone records are theirs. We have to be a party that I think is more boldly for what we are for, too. And that means we have to be a party of lower taxes, the Constitution, balancing the budget. In fact, I think we can be more boldly for all of that. People say, well, we need to be more like the Democrats if we want to win in a Democrat state. I don't think there's anything about fiscal conservatism you have to give up at all. I think it would help if we were for privacy as well. And I think there's some other issues that maybe right and left agree on that we could maybe say we can find some common ground on. One of these is criminal justice. I don't frankly think that a young person that makes a mistake, that injures themselves with drugs, should be put in jail for 10 years or 15 years. I think you deserve a second chance, and that our kids that make a mistake like this can have a second chance. We've made the laws such that sometimes the judges have no discretion. I'm going to stand right here. There was a woman, she was a nurse, and she wrote a bad prescription, an illegal prescription. She got 60 Lortab. She got 15 years in prison. Should she be punished? Yes. Should we do something about it? Yes. But Lortab is 95% Tylenol. She was punished for the whole weight of it, most of which was Tylenol. So figure out a punishment. If someone does a crime, do something with them. Make them work, for goodness sakes. Make them do something. But cluttering up our jails actually leaves less space for the violent criminals. In California recently, they took some of the minor, nonviolent drug felonies and they made them misdemeanors. You know what happened? Within 4 months, they were no longer releasing anybody early. because they've been so overcrowded that they've been releasing violent criminals early. Now they're all staying in for their full terms. I think there are ways that we can say that we are a party of compassion. When we look at the Bill of Rights and we say, well, should we defend the whole thing? Can we be the party of justice? You know, we were the party of emancipation. A lot of people seem to have forgotten that. We were the party of civil rights. A lot of people have forgotten that. But why can't we still be the party of justice? The Fifth Amendment says that you cannot take someone's property from one individual and give it to another private property owner. And yet, the Supreme Court has gotten it wrong. Now, it's not the first time the Supreme Court's gotten it wrong, but they got this one really, really wrong. In 2005, there was a Kelo case. The Kelo case said that a big corporation can take someone's house if the big corporation says, by taking their house, we'll increase tax revenue for the government. So your property rights became relative after the Kelo case. It's one of the most hated cases by conservatives across the country. But we have a candidate in our race who used eminent domain to make his money, or at least to make some of it. When Trump builds a casino, if he wants your house, he'll take it through eminent domain. When he was asked about the Kelo case, he said he agrees with it 100%. I don't know how we can have a party that has become so confused by someone who really doesn't share our fundamental principles. He's hot and heavy and he's angry, but what's he really for? He was for Obamacare before he was against Obamacare. He's still for raising taxes, which I find an anathema. I think that's not the party that I belong to. He's also a party that doesn't really believe in private property rights. He's still for eminent domain to take a private property owner and give it to somebody else. He was for the government stimulus that Obama was for, and he says Democrats run the economy better. Why in the world will we let someone like that fool us? We're going to have to wake up, or you're going to wake up one day and your nominee is going to be somebody who is not really a conservative. And I've been saying it over and over again. He's a fake conservative, and we golly well better wake up pretty soon about it. People ask me, what's the worst thing that President Obama's done? And I say, how long do you have? But if I wanted to sum it all up and say, what's the worst thing the president's doing to the country? It's the collapse of the separation of powers. Our founding fathers said we were going to have co-equal branches of government, and they would check and balance each other. Madison said that we will pit ambition against ambition. The ambition of Congress to grab more power against the president's ambition to take power, and there would be an equilibrium. They would balance each other. But it's been going on for a while now. President Obama has accelerated it, but it may have been going on for 100 years. Congress has been asleep at the switch. And power and power and power keeps accumulating in the executive branch. Unelected bureaucrats are really writing our laws. Unelected bureaucrats have more power than a senator has. Obamacare, you remember? 2,000 pages. Nancy Pelosi says you can read about it after the fact. It became 20,000 pages, written by unelected bureaucrats, people you cannot get rid of. The executive branch is on steroids, and it's destroying the country. This president has said he's got a phone and a pen. That doesn't sound like the president of a republic. That sounds like an autocrat. Someone who says he's got strength and he'll take care of it despite what you want. We got Republicans in the House. We've got Republicans in the Senate. So the president's doing whatever he wants by executive order. One of the philosophers that our founders looked to is a guy named Montesquieu. And Montesquieu said, when the executive begins to legislate, a form of tyranny will ensue. That's what's going on. But it hasn't just been the Democrats. It's getting a lot worse under President Obama, but it's been going on for a long time because we've let our congressmen and congresswomen fall asleep and just let it happen. You've got to get stronger people in Congress. But you also have to get a president someday that will say, I'm going to use the presidency not to accumulate more power, but to devolve and give that power back to the states and the people. That's what we need. There have been a lot of scandals. He used the IRS to look at reporters' records. He used the IRS to go after Tea Party groups and conservative groups. He's used it to invade the religious liberty of private corporations. When I think of all the scandals, I think of the old rhyme, here a scandal, there a scandal, everywhere a scandal. But of all the scandals, I think what really stands out and what bothers me the most is Benghazi. In Benghazi, you've heard him on television talk about the spin, the movie, all the made-up sort of reasons for why it might have occurred, all the justifications, but I think we've missed the boat. I think what really is the most important thing about Benghazi is that for 9 months leading up to the attack, they begged for more security. Not once, not twice, dozens of times. Beginning 9 months beforehand, though, Hillary Clinton, who was in charge and responsible, began bringing the military home. There was a couple special forces teams there. You know how special forces people can fight. A few of them can do a lot. 6 of them were brought home in February. 6 of them were brought home in March. The remaining soldiers were told, this is a direct quote from Colonel Wood, who was over there, do not wear your military-style boots because we don't want to offend the freedom fighters, the Libyan freedom fighters. Do you know who the Libyan freedom fighters are? Like the head of ISIS, some of them were in prison, our prison, because they were terrorists. Most of them are jihadists. Most of them hate us. We toppled Gaddafi, who wasn't a princely guy either, but he didn't tolerate radical Islam. Once we toppled him, what did we get? We got chaos. We got the rise of radical Islam, and now Libya is a failed state. A third of Libya pledges allegiance to ISIS, but who were these people that wanted to go to war in Libya? Hillary's war was Hillary Clinton. Obama's war was President Obama. And a significant amount of Republicans who said, the only thing we object to is we should have had American boots on the ground. If we had only had American boots on the ground in Libya. Well, you know what? It was a mistake to get involved in Libya, and we're less safe because of it. It got worse. Think about it. So that she's letting all the people go. They won the war. The freedom fighters won the war. Not one of them likes us. Not one of them will recognize Israel. Not one of them is really, truly our friend. As the war ends, and we have this 9 months before the ambassador is assassinated, she keeps letting the troops go home. Troops go home here and there. In March, they asked for a plane to fly around in case there's an emergency, which there eventually was an emergency, and when we had the emergency, there was no plane. Hillary Clinton turned down the plane, and when we finally had the emergency, we're begging the Libyans to fly around in an American-made plane that we probably bought for them that's sitting on a runway, but we could only use by begging the Libyans, and it took us hours and hours to get their approval, and it may have delayed saving the ambassador. About 3 days after she denied the plane for the country, she approved $100,000. This is Hillary Clinton in the State Department. She approved $100,000 for a charging station for the embassy in Vienna. See, they bought about 24 Chevy Volts. Well, that's right, you bought them all because they're all subsidized, like $200,000 a piece. You bought Chevy Volts for over there, but then lo and behold, these brilliant people who are greening up the embassy neglected to figure out they didn't have the right plugs to plug them in, so we paid $100,000. They can't protect the embassy in Benghazi, but they have enough money to green up the embassy in Vienna. You get to the summer. Hillary Clinton spends another $100,000 on 3 comics. She sent 3 comics to India on the Make Chai Not War tour. They spent $650,000, the State Department, on advertisements for friends. Seems like the Facebook for the State Department didn't have enough friends. $650,000 on ads. They spent $700,000 on landscaping in the Brussels embassy. Spent $5 million for bar glasses, crystal bar glasses for the embassies. It gets to August. We're a month before the ambassador is killed, and Colonel Wood's the last remaining security team there. He has 16 people with him. He's writing message after message. There's danger of being overrun. The British ambassador is recalled. They put a hole in the side with some kind of grenade launcher. They put a hole in the side of the British embassy and they pull out. We're still there, but we're begging for support. Colonel Wood is writing letters back. Now the ambassador gets involved. The ambassador now is sending cable after cable to Hillary Clinton. So when she came before our committee to discuss the review of what happened in Benghazi, I asked her this question. I said, Secretary Clinton, did you read any of the cables requesting help? requesting more security. And she acted all haughty, like she was too good to be doing that, and that was for some low-level person. Libya was one of the most dangerous countries on the planet, emerging from a horrible war and really still in the middle of a civil war, and she doesn't have time to read the cables. And so my conclusion is that her dereliction of duty, her not providing adequate security, should forever preclude her from holding higher office. But people say, well, how will we defend ourselves now that we have ISIS, now that we have this group or that group? And I'd say, you know what the first thing we ought to do? Why don't we quit arming our enemies? ISIS rides around in $1 billion worth of U.S. Humvees. They have $1 billion of cash. They pay their soldiers with our money. They have anti-tank weapons that we gave to the Islamic rebels in Syria, and they were immediately snatched up. They have our tanks, for goodness sakes. I warned 2 years before ISIS came up, as we were giving arms to the Islamic rebels in Syria, I said, mark my words, we'll be back again fighting against our own weapons. It is a mistake, it is foolishness to give money to Islamic rebels who you say are moderate, that I don't believe are moderate, and probably lied to you to get weapons, not one of which really likes us. In fact, many of them that said they'll use their weapons to go after Israel next. So the whole thing is a charade. Why are we giving weapons to people who hate us? The ambassador to Syria from the United States was there, and I asked him this question. I said, what about all these jihadists on the same side of the war that we're funding? And he said this. He said, it's inevitable that the arms we are giving will fight alongside Al-Qaeda. And it's like, really? I thought we'd been at war. I thought they attacked us on 9/11, and I thought that's who we were trying to stop, Al-Qaeda. Why would we be giving arms to people who are fighting in the same trench? He said, oh, we're just giving them to the moderates. So one CIA analyst said, he said, you know what? The only thing moderate about them is their ability to fight. So none of this has worked, and so what do? We try more of it. We decided we would spend, and I voted against this too, $500 million training an army of free Syrian moderates. So we've spent $250 million over the last year, and you know how many people we've trained? 60. $4 million per fighter. So we have 60 fighters. So what did some genius decide to do with them? Send them into war 5 at a time. We sent the first 5 into Syria 2 weeks ago. They lasted 10 minutes. They were immediately captured by al-Nusra. Who is al-Nusra? Radical jihadists, friends of Al-Qaeda, and allies of ours. So they're all against Assad. Al-Nusra captures them. I don't know what that means. Will they hold them for ransom? Will they kill them? I'm not sure. We're fighting alongside Al-Qaeda. We should not arm our enemies. We should not get involved in a war where things will be better, will be worse off afterwards. If there's one truth in the Middle East, and it's a very confusing place, if there is one truth, every time we've toppled a secular strongman, we've gotten chaos and the rise of radical Islam. Every time we've said, we're going to make you democratic, we're going to make you like America, they elect jihadists and radical Islamists who hate America. Democracy will devolve into anti-Americanism over there. Sometimes maybe it is best that we don't intervene. And then some say, well, you're an isolationist. You won't do anything. We do have responsibilities to protect America, to protect our soldiers, to protect our embassies, frankly. So there are times we have to fight. You heard me. My biggest complaint about Benghazi is we didn't protect them. So if I were commander-in-chief, I will do whatever it takes to protect America, whatever it takes to protect our soldiers. We have trade routes. We're not going to come home and live behind the oceans. But at the same time, just because I don't want to be involved in every civil war, that doesn't make me an isolationist. There's 2 extremes. One is that we're nowhere any of the time, and one is that we're everywhere all the time. This is where we are, everywhere all the time. If we back away from that some, doesn't make you an isolationist, it makes you a realist. Someone who says we have to think about America, we have to think about the repercussions. There was an article recently by an op-ed, and in it the writer said, we need to learn in this region to amplify our allies. What does that mean? Let's help those who will help us and who are for us. The Syrian moderates, I don't think necessarily are, and they're not a fighting force. The Kurds have been fighting for a homeland for decades. They'll fight to the death, and I can tell you one thing, I'd much rather arm the Kurds than send 500,000 of our young men and women back. If you want to go back and you want troops back in the Middle East, I'm not your guy. You got 10 other choices. There will always be a Bush or a Clinton that will take you back. I'm a Reagan conservative. My family was supporting Reagan before there was a party. In 1976, I was in Kansas City when my dad was a delegate for Reagan. We supported Reagan against the other wing of the party. There's always been another wing of the party, but against the other wing because the grassroots conservatives were coming on strong in the 70s and the establishment wasn't doing anything. And we decided we'd win. We'd win by putting a real conservative who believed in smaller government, less taxes, a strong national defense, strong enough to deter any attack, strong enough to repel any attack, but not one eager for war. Reagan's doctrine, he had a doctrine of how we use military force that was before Colin Powell's and similar to it. War should be the last resort, not the first resort. When we fight with overwhelming power. We don't fight with one arm behind our back. We fight to win, and we come home. That's what we used to believe in. If we're going to win again, we have to have a strategy. And sometimes this speech is hard in Tennessee or Kentucky or Utah or Wyoming, where they always win. Republicans always win. Whatever nominee we put forward will win the red states. I think what we need to think about is what is the possibility of having a nominee who could actually win a blue state, could actually win a purple state. Right now I lead Hillary Clinton in 5 states won by President Obama. I lead Hillary Clinton in Pennsylvania. We haven't won Pennsylvania since 1988. Why? Because I can get the youth to come out who say their cell phone data is theirs and the government shouldn't be looking at it. I can get independents to come out and say, I do want a strong national defense, but I don't want to bankrupt the country with a blank check for the military. There is really an unholy alliance in Washington. You need to realize this. The right, some of them, want unlimited spending on the military. The left wants unlimited spending on welfare, and what happens every time? There's a behind closed door agreement and all spending goes up. You heard of the sequester? The sequester was a slowdown in the rate of spending. Everybody went crazy. Those who say we need unlimited money for the Pentagon are apoplectic. They say we got to have more money. The left, you have a few of them in the Senate from Vermont, they're all going crazy. They're all going crazy, wanting more welfare, but they got rid of the sequester. They got rid of these across-the-board cuts, and the rumor is this fall we're going to get rid of the budget caps. If that happens, we will give up the mantle of being the conservative party. If we're in charge of the House and the Senate, we give up on any caps on spending. And mind you, these are not cuts. These are caps in the rate of growth. Government is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and we're trying to slow down some of it. If we give up on that, you know, we might as well rethink who we are as a party if we're going to give up on any kind of budgetary caps. But we can win. You can win with a candidate that's as fiscally conservative as anybody in the country, who's for low taxes, less regulations, for the Bill of Rights. But I'm also for privacy. I'm also for a reasonable foreign policy. I'm also for criminal justice that says people should get a second chance. All of that together is a mixture that I think could attract new people to our party. You meet Democrats, I guarantee you've met Democrats in your walk of life who are fiscally conservative but don't like us for other reasons. They may come to us on some of these other issues that I think are all completely consistent with a small government philosophy. The Sixth Amendment says you have a right to a trial by jury. You say, well, who can be against that? Well, you lost a little bit of it in 2011, whether you know it or not. In 2011, we debated something called the Defense Authorization Bill, and we gave up some of that freedom. In fact, an American citizen can be detained forever without a trial. So I was having this debate on the Senate floor with another senator, and I don't like to name names, but from Arizona. We're going back and forth, and I said, do you mean an American citizen without a trial, without a lawyer, could be sent to Guantanamo Bay? And he said, yes, if they're dangerous. And I said, well, Kind of begs the question, doesn't it? Who gets to determine who's dangerous and who's not? If you don't have a trial, how do you know? That's a real danger in our country. And to me, I thought of Richard Jules, the first thought that came to my mind. Remember, he was the one everybody said was the Olympic bomber about 15 years ago in Atlanta on that Centennial Park. Everybody thought he was. The media convicted him within an hour. The whole country thought he was a bomber. Why? Because he fit the profile. He had glasses. I see a couple of you out there. He was an introvert. He had a backpack, and he was helpful after that. These were all the characteristics, I promise you, that pegged him as the bomber. But he wasn't a bomber. But, you know, I was thinking during this debate with McCain, I'm thinking, what if Richard Jewell had been a black man in the South in 1920? What might have happened to him? We were the party that was against lynching. We were the party that was for justice. We were the party for the Bill of Rights. And I'm here to tell you today that there is so much of this that if we would defend the Sixth Amendment with the same passion as the Second Amendment, we're going to be a party so big, we're going to rock and roll to victory. We're going to win blue states like Vermont. That's what I want to be part of, and I hope you do too. Thank you very much.